On Friday, October 9th, 2026, the stack of documents landed on the mahogany dining table with a heavy, muted thud. I stared at the thick ivory cardstock. A shiny gold ribbon bound the pages together, catching the warm light from the chandelier overhead. My mother leaned over my shoulder, bringing a suffocating cloud of sweet vanilla perfume with her. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the top page. It read, "Villa Transfer and Family Legacy." The paper felt strangely cold under my fingertips. I am 39 years old and I have spent the last 15 years working as a senior property and trust asset manager. Because of my career, I know exactly what legal transfer documents are supposed to look like. This was not a deed. It was an ambush. "You are giving my son your villa for his birthday," my sister Kendra declared from the other side of the table. She adjusted her designer sweater and smiled for the phone she had set up on a tripod in the corner. The red recording light blinked steadily. Kendra had built an entire social media brand around being a self-made mother creating generational wealth, and tonight was supposed to be her season finale. "You do not have children, Meredith," she continued, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "You do not need a $2.8 million estate all to yourself." My mother clapped her hands together. Family always takes care of family. This is such a beautiful moment. My father slid a heavy brass pen across the polished wood. It clinked sharply against my water glass. "It is about building a legacy, sweetie. You should not look at it as a sacrifice." I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I looked at my 16-year-old nephew. Noah sat rigidly in his chair, staring down at his untouched slice of chocolate cake. He looked miserable. He hated being the face of his mother's content, and he clearly wanted no part of this performance. Earlier that evening, before the guests arrived, my mother had handed me her unlocked tablet to check the caterer's menu. While I searched for the appetizer list, an email notification dropped across the top of the screen. The subject line read, "Friday transfer." I opened the thread. Kendra had written that the lender was closing on Monday, and that everyone needed to keep the conversation focused on Noah's birthday, so I would not ask questions about the investors. I photographed the messages with my phone, sent the images to Mara, and asked her to bring Vivian to the villa before dessert. Then I returned the tablet to my mother and acted as though I had seen nothing. They believed they were preparing an ambush. They did not know the real owner was already on her way. Now, sitting at the dinner table with the scent of roasted garlic still lingering in the air, I slowly pulled the gold ribbon off the packet. I flipped past the decorative cover sheet. As a property manager, my eyes naturally darted to the legal headers. There was no grant deed here. There was nothing transferring ownership from the actual owner to anyone else. Instead, I found a termination of occupancy and management rights. Beneath that lay a waiver of right of first refusal, followed by an occupancy estoppel certificate. Every single document named Noah Legacy Holdings LLC as the receiving party, and every single page required my signature. They did not want me to give them the house. They needed me to legally erase my recorded right to live in it. "Where's the grant deed from the owner?" I asked. My voice remained perfectly level. My father waved his hand dismissively. "Kendra's broker handled that part of the paperwork. We just need you to sign your release so the title company can process the gift." I looked directly at my sister. "Who signed on behalf of Cross Heritage Properties?" Kendra shifted her weight. Her perfect smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Do not ruin this with technicalities, Meredith. Everything has been taken care of." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. A sudden, vivid memory rushed through my mind. 5 years ago, I had drained my savings to pay my parents' overdue property taxes so they would not lose their home. 2 years after that, I had taken Noah in for 3 straight weeks, while Kendra went on a luxury wellness retreat to recover from her own poor financial choices. I had spent my entire adult life acting as the safety net for people who only saw me as a resource. "Meredith," my mother urged, pushing the pen closer to my hand. "Do not be selfish tonight. If you really love Noah," Kendra added, her voice rising to make sure the camera caught her words, "you will sign it right now so we can cut the cake and celebrate his future." I looked down at the documents one last time. Then I looked up at my family. A quiet, terrifying sense of calm washed over me. I smiled. It was not a happy expression. "If you want this house," I said smoothly, "then you should ask the real owner." My father frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together. "What are you talking about?" "You have managed this place for 9 years and lived here for 7. Living here does not mean I own it," I replied. Before Kendra could open her mouth to argue, a sharp, piercing chime echoed through the high-vaulted ceilings. The doorbell. The dining room fell completely silent. Noah looked up from his plate. Kendra shot a confused glare toward the entryway. I crossed the foyer and opened the heavy oak door. Mara stood outside beside an older woman, a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Vivian Cross stepped into the warm light of the hallway. Vivian Cross wore a tailored navy suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, looking exactly like the formidable businesswoman who had mentored me for the better part of a decade. Kendra recognized her from old photographs. The color drained from my sister's face. Vivian walked straight into the dining room. She did not greet my parents. She did not look at the birthday cake. Her sharp eyes fell immediately onto the stack of documents resting near my hands. "Which one of you?" Vivian asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Told a lender my company had agreed to transfer this house." Nobody moved. My mother's mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Vivian stepped closer to the table, placing her hand flat against the glossy wood. "Before anyone leaves, I want to know who signed a deed on behalf of my company." Mara moved past my frozen family members. She carried a sleek leather folder under her arm. Unzipping it, the attorney pulled out a stack of crisp, white pages and laid them directly next to Kendra's gold ribbon trap. These were the real documents. The preliminary title report, the property deed, and the operating agreement for Cross Heritage Properties LLC. "This property belongs entirely to Cross Heritage," Mara said. Her tone was pleasant but left absolutely no room for debate. "Vivian is the sole managing member. The title search clearly shows she has the only authority to transfer ownership." Mara pointed a manicured finger to a highlighted section on the report. The search also shows a recorded memorandum. It legally protects Meredith's occupancy and her right of first refusal. Signing those papers on the table would only erase Meredith's rights. It would not give anyone title to the house. My sister blinked. Her posture shifted instantly, the confident social media influencer melting into a wounded victim. She looked toward the phone in the corner, ensuring the red recording light was still blinking. "You let us believe this was your house?" Kendra said, her voice trembling perfectly. "You let Mom and Dad tell everyone you owned it. You tricked your own family just to look successful." My hands rested flat against the cool mahogany table. I did not raise my voice, and I did not defend my success. "I have told you for 9 years that I manage this estate. I never once claimed to own it outright." My father scoffed. The harsh sound echoed in the quiet dining room. "Those are just technicalities, Meredith. You live here. You pay the utilities. It is basically yours, and you know it." I reached into my blazer pocket. My fingers brushed against the folded piece of paper I had carried with me all evening. Unfolding it carefully, I slid the printed email across the polished wood toward Kendra. I had sent it exactly 2 weeks ago. "I wrote this to you the day you announced Noah's birthday venue," I said. I tapped the center paragraph. "I explicitly stated that I do not own the villa. I told you that you were not permitted to promote, transfer, mortgage, or raise money using this property." Kendra stared at the paper. She did not bother reading it, because she already knew exactly what it said. "And you replied," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on hers, telling me I was hiding behind technicalities. "You knew the truth. You chose to ignore it so you could put on this show." The room felt suffocating. The scent of vanilla perfume and roasted garlic suddenly made me nauseous. My family had built a massive lie on top of my silence, and I was about to find out exactly how deep that lie went. I slid my hand into my other pocket, finding the smooth metal of the silver house key. Vivian had given it to me 9 years ago. Back then, I was just a junior property manager reviewing her estate accounts. I had caught a contractor overbilling her by tens of thousands of dollars. Reporting him meant risking a huge account. But I did it anyway. Vivian did not fire me. She fired the contractor, sued his company, and made me her personal asset manager. 2 years later, I found her collapsed in her kitchen after a minor stroke. I called the ambulance, stayed by her hospital bed, and coordinated her professional care team. Vivian eventually bought a smaller, accessible condo near her rehabilitation center. She hired proper nurses, refusing to let me sacrifice my career to become her caretaker. Instead, she offered me the occupancy and management agreement for the villa. It was a business arrangement built on absolute trust. I was the family she chose, and she was the mentor who taught me how to stand up straight. "How many times must you save them before you admit they are choosing to drown?" Vivian had asked me once, watching me agonize over my parents' credit card debts. I finally understood her question. Vivian broke the silence in the dining room. She looked at my father with narrowed eyes. "Why did this have to happen tonight? Why ruin your grandson's birthday dinner to force a signature?" Raymond ran a trembling hand over his thinning hair. The pressure of the evening was finally breaking his composure. He looked at the paperwork, then at me. "Because the lender closes Monday," he snapped. Kendra whipped her head around. Her eyes went wide with pure panic, silently begging him to stop talking. A cold chill washed down my spine. Lenders do not close on a whim. They close when an escrow file is fully prepared to fund. I looked down at the decorative packet they had presented to me. Discarding the gold ribbon entirely, I pulled the cover sheet forward. My eyes scanned the fine print at the very bottom of the page. It clearly stated that the owner transfer documents had already been placed into escrow. My occupancy release was merely the final condition required by the title company to clear the encumbrance. They did not need me to fake being the owner. They just needed me out of the way. I flipped past the estoppel certificate, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached the last page of the packet. A single sentence sat isolated at the bottom of the thick paper. I read the words out loud. "Release effective upon recordation of grant deed from Cross Heritage Properties LLC to Noah Legacy Holdings LLC." The air left the room. I looked up from the table, staring directly into my sister's terrified eyes. "Kendra," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "What grant deed?" The house fell completely still after my family departed, leaving behind a half-eaten chocolate cake and a dining room thick with unspoken betrayals. I stood next to the mahogany table, staring at the empty chairs. My sister had not answered my question about the grant deed. Kendra had simply grabbed her designer purse, avoided my eyes, and walked out the heavy oak door. Mara moved before anyone could clear the table. The attorney pulled a sleek smartphone from her jacket pocket and held it over the decorative packet. A synthetic shutter sound echoed through the high ceilings as she began photographing every single page of the release documents. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I am preserving the evidence," Mara stated flatly. She snapped another picture. "They attempted to clear an encumbrance on Vivian's property using fraudulent pretenses. We are keeping a complete digital record of exactly what they tried to make you sign." I kept my eyes on the paperwork. The operating document for Noah Legacy Holdings sat right beneath the waiver. A quick glance at the highlighted management structure confirmed my worst suspicions. Kendra was listed as the sole managing member. She held the absolute authority to borrow, sell, and mortgage any asset the company acquired. The limited liability company carried my nephew's name, but the 16-year-old boy possessed zero actual power. He was nothing but a moral shield for a corporate entity. The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. I flipped to the occupancy estoppel certificate and found the liability clause tucked near the bottom. It required me to swear I had no disputes regarding the title transfer. By signing it, I would have assumed legal responsibility for verifying the transaction. If the lender ever discovered the fraud, the paperwork would point directly at me as a willing participant. They had built a trapdoor, and they had expected me to walk right over it. After they left, I opened the 3 photographs I had taken from Linda's tablet before dinner and handed my phone to Mara. The messages were impossible to misunderstand. "She signs Friday," my father had written. "The lender closes Monday," Kendra had replied. Then came the line that changed the entire case. "Do not mention the investors at dinner. Keep it strictly about Noah's birthday." Investors. The party had never been only about securing a loan. Kendra had already taken money from other people. A sharp ringing sound suddenly pierced the quiet room. Mara pulled her phone from her pocket and checked the caller identification. She frowned, answered the call, and put it on speaker so Vivian and I could hear. "Hello." A woman's voice crackled through the small speaker. "My name is Helen Ortiz. I am looking for the owner of the Hale Family Villa project. I was told I could arrange a property tour this weekend." Mara exchanged a swift, dark look with Vivian. "There is no project by that name here. Who gave you this number?" "Kendra Hale gave it to me as the emergency estate contact," Helen replied. Her voice tightened with sudden concern. "I transferred $180,000 from my late husband's life insurance into the project last month." "What do you mean there is no project?" I closed my eyes. The trap was so much larger and so much more dangerous than a simple family disagreement. My sister had sold empty promises to innocent people. "Ma'am," Mara said carefully, her professional tone kicking into high gear, "we need to speak with you immediately. How many other people are involved in this?" Helen took a ragged breath. The sound translated perfectly over the digital connection. "I am not the only one. There are at least 7 of us. And Kendra told us the deed would be transferred tonight." The desert sun glared through the tall, arched windows of the living room on Saturday morning. Helen Ortiz sat on the edge of the linen sofa, holding a worn leather binder tight against her chest. She wore a simple gray cardigan over a pressed blouse. The older woman carried herself with a quiet, careful dignity. Helen did not look like someone who gave her money away to fools. She looked like a widow who had trusted the wrong friend. Mara sat in the armchair across the coffee table, a legal pad balanced on her knee. Vivian stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed tight. I brought a tray of coffee from the kitchen, set it down, and took the seat next to Helen. The widow opened her binder. Her hands possessed a slight tremor, but her voice remained perfectly steady. She slid a glossy, full-color brochure across the glass table. "Your mother invited me to her book club last month," Helen explained. Linda spent the entire afternoon talking about Kendra. She said her youngest daughter was building a massive family legacy and offering a few close friends the chance to get in on the ground floor. Linda personally guaranteed the investment. I looked down at the heavy cardstock. The cover displayed a breathtaking drone photograph of the exact villa we were sitting inside. Bold gold lettering declared it the flagship property of Noah Legacy Holdings. Helen pulled out her smartphone, tapped the screen, and placed it next to the brochure. A video began to play. Kendra stood right outside the wrought iron gates of the estate. She wore a tailored white suit, looking the picture of a successful entrepreneur. In the video, my sister smiled brightly and promised her viewers that the villa would officially transfer into the management fund right after her son's birthday. The profits from luxury rentals and a planned refinancing would be distributed to the founding partners. "I believed her," Helen whispered, looking down at her hands. "I wired $180,000. It was the last of my husband's life insurance." I picked up the brochure. The heavy paper felt like sandpaper against my fingertips. Flipping to the second page, my breath caught in my throat. A photograph of me stared back from the glossy print. It was a candid shot taken at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago. I was smiling, holding a glass of champagne. Right beneath my picture, a massive quote was printed in bold, italic letters. "Kendra never gives up on family," the text read, attributing the words to Meredith Hale, Senior Trust Manager. My stomach twisted into a tight, heavy knot. I had actually said those exact words. I had spoken them to a judge during Kendra's messy divorce hearing 5 years ago, right after I had paid her entire legal retainer out of my own savings account. Whenever Kendra vanished for weeks to avoid her responsibilities, I had picked up Noah from school. I had packed his lunches, washed his clothes, and covered her rent. Every single time I pulled her out of a disaster, she had taken my silent support and twisted it into an endorsement. She had weaponized my loyalty to convince people like Helen that she was a safe bet. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with my sister's name. I stared at the device for a long moment, watching it vibrate against the glass. The air in the living room grew incredibly still. I picked up the phone, answered the call, and put it on speaker so the entire room could hear. "Meredith," Kendra said. Her voice sounded strained, entirely stripped of the confident polish from the promo video. "You need to fix this right now." "Fix what, Kendra?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "Do not play dumb with me," my sister snapped, the panic bleeding through her words. "I have investors waiting for their closing confirmation. If you blow this up, those people are going to lose every single dollar they put into the company. Noah is going to be humiliated. You will be destroying innocent lives just to prove a point." She was actually trying to blame me for the collapse of her own scheme. The audacity of the manipulation left a bitter taste in my mouth. "I am not the one who took their money," I replied slowly. "I am not the one who sold them a house I do not own." "Just sign the release," Kendra pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate, hushed register. "Sign the paper, let the closing go through on Monday, and we will fix the ownership structure later. I promise." I ended the call without saying another word. The screen went dark, but the silence did not last long. A sharp, bright chime interrupted the quiet. Helen looked down at her smartphone. A new notification had appeared on her lock screen. The widow tapped the message, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. All the color drained from her face. "It is from Kendra's company," Helen said, her voice shaking now. She turned the phone around so we could all see the screen. It was an automated marketing email. The system had clearly been scheduled in advance, and my sister had either forgotten to cancel it or intentionally let it run. The subject line read, "Transfer complete." The body of the message cheerfully welcomed the investors to the legacy, declaring that the title had officially been secured and the Monday closing was moving forward as planned. Kendra was still lying to them, continuing the performance even after her plan at the dinner table had completely failed. The automated campaign went out on Saturday morning. Mara immediately forwarded it, along with Vivian's ownership records, and my written warning to Kendra, to the title company. By Monday morning, the title company fraud desk had reviewed the preliminary report and the documents submitted for closing. At 9:15, Mara's laptop chimed with their response. "This is from the title company fraud desk," Mara said. Her professional composure finally cracked, revealing absolute horror underneath. Vivian stepped forward, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "Read it, Mara." The lawyer looked up at us. "The escrow officer placed a hold on the file this morning. They flagged the transaction because the documents submitted for the closing do not match the preliminary title report." I leaned closer. "What documents?" "Kendra did not just submit the LLC operating agreement," Mara explained, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The escrow file contains a grant deed transferring the property to Noah Legacy Holdings. It has a signature claiming to be Vivian Cross." The room started to spin. "And," Mara swallowed hard, turning her laptop screen toward me, "it contains a full release of occupancy and right of first refusal. It is fully notarized, and it has your signature on it, Meredith." I stared at the digital copies attached to the email. The ink on the screen spelled out my name, legally erasing my rights to the home I lived in. I had never touched that piece of paper in my life. Mara turned her laptop toward me, the screen casting a pale blue glow across the glass coffee table. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the digital files the title company had just emailed to her. The first document was a forged grant deed claiming to transfer the villa from Cross Heritage Properties to Noah Legacy Holdings. Right below it sat a fake, limited liability company resolution, supposedly authorizing the transaction. Both papers bore the signature of Vivian Cross. The second set of files contained a termination and release of occupancy, alongside an occupancy estoppel certificate. My name was signed at the bottom of both pages, legally erasing my right to live in the home and clearing the final encumbrance for the lender. I stared at the black ink on the bright screen. The signatures looked authentic at first glance, but a sudden chill settled in my chest as I noticed a very specific detail. My eyes locked onto the tail end of my name on the release form. A long, jagged drag mark extended from the final letter. I recognized that awkward scratch instantly. 5 years ago, my favorite fountain pen had skipped while I was signing a routine renewal of my occupancy agreement with Vivian. I shifted my gaze to Vivian's forged signature on the grant deed. Right next to the date, a tiny, distinct speck of ink dotted the paper. It was the exact same flaw from the exact same old contract. Kendra had not just hired a stranger to forge our names. My sister had taken the legal proof I sent her 2 weeks ago, the very document I provided to prove my lack of ownership, and weaponized it. She had traced our signatures perfectly, pulling them from a private email thread to build a fraudulent escrow file. Before I could point out the ink marks to Mara, my phone vibrated violently against the table. The caller identification displayed the main compliance line for my wealth management firm. My stomach dropped. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, stepping away from the sofa. My managing director spoke in a clipped, formal tone, entirely devoid of his usual warmth. The title company had flagged a suspicious release of encumbrance attached to my name and contacted our corporate office. Because the property belonged to a client of our firm, my boss informed me that a severe conflict of interest had been triggered. He instructed me to step back from all cross-heritage accounts immediately and suspended my access to the files until an internal investigation concluded. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. My career, carefully built over 15 years of flawless performance, hung by a fragile thread. My sister had placed my entire professional livelihood directly into the line of fire. Vivian stood by the limestone fireplace, watching me with an expression of profound sadness. The older woman adjusted her silver bracelet and spoke in a quiet, firm tone. She promised she would protect her property whether I testified or not, but she clarified that she could not protect my professional reputation if I chose to remain silent. Vivian reminded me of the question she had asked years ago about saving people who actively chose to drown. The choice belonged entirely to me, and the window to make it was closing fast. I walked over to Mara. The attorney had already pulled blank legal declaration forms from her leather briefcase. A heavy silence filled the living room as I picked up a pen. I did not hesitate. The ink flowed smoothly across the page as I swore under penalty of perjury that I had never signed the release or the estoppel certificate. Vivian took the pen next, signing her own statement disavowing the grant deed and the resolution. Mara scanned the documents immediately, attaching them to a preservation notice. Within minutes, the files were sent to the title company and the lender fraud department. The escrow account was officially locked. The Monday closing was completely dead. My phone rang again. This time, my sister's name flashed on the glass. I answered the call, putting her on speaker so the attorney and the true owner could listen. Kendra sounded breathless, completely panicked by the sudden freeze on her escrow file. She immediately blamed her real estate broker, claiming he had called the owner authorization and occupant release simple technical steps. She insisted the broker had prepared all the paperwork on his own and begged me to withdraw my fraud declaration so they could fix the misunderstanding before the investors found out. I let her finish her frantic explanation. The desperation in her voice echoed through the quiet living room, but it was built on a foundation of absolute lies. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment. If the broker prepared the forged documents, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even, then why were both of our signatures lifted from the exact same occupancy agreement I emailed to you last month? The line went completely dead. Kendra had no answer. She remained quiet for an uncomfortable amount of time, a long pause that confirmed every single suspicion we held. Before I could end the call, Mara received another notification on her laptop. The attorney read the incoming message from the lender fraud officer, and her hands stopped moving over the keyboard. She looked up at me, her expression reflecting a new, much deeper level of betrayal. The fraud desk had just located another file in the system. It was an audio recording of a verification call. My father had spoken directly to the lender, guaranteeing them that Vivian had agreed to the transfer in principle and promising that I would personally deliver the signed release before Monday morning. Mara tapped the spacebar on her laptop. A faint hum of static filled the living room, followed by a voice I had listened to my entire life. My father sounded remarkably calm on the recording, projecting the steady, unshakable authority he usually reserved for giving advice at family dinners. The title officer on the line asked him specifically about the preliminary report, pointing out that Cross Heritage held the deed while I possessed recorded occupancy rights. Vivian Cross has agreed in principle, Raymond stated smoothly. His voice echoed through the high ceilings of the villa, perfectly capturing the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. My daughter manages the property, and she always comes around when the family needs her. We will have the full owner authorization and her signed release delivered to escrow before Monday morning. He had pledged my submission as if it were a physical asset. The man who raised me had spoken to a financial institution and guaranteed my surrender, completely aware that Vivian had never consented to sell anything. By Tuesday afternoon, the lender had preserved the verification call and delivered a copy to Mara. Before we finished reviewing it, 2 more notifications appeared on her screen. The attorney opened the first attachment and let out a sharp breath. The notary whose stamp appeared on the forged grant deed and my fake release had responded to the urgent preservation notice. They provided a sworn statement alongside a scanned copy of their official journal, proving conclusively that neither Vivian nor I had ever appeared before them. The acknowledgement seal had been unlawfully copied from a completely different transaction. The second file contained a simple audit trail from the title company. It traced the exact digital footprint of the forged documents, showing they were uploaded directly through a secure portal registered to Noah Legacy Holdings. Kendra had used her own business account to submit the fakes, and the timestamp matched the exact hour I had refused to sign the paperwork at the birthday dinner. On Thursday afternoon, after the notary statement and the title company's audit trail had been formally preserved, a heavy knock sounded at the front door. Helen jumped slightly on the sofa, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. I walked across the terracotta tiles and pulled the heavy oak door open. My father stood on the porch. For the first time in 39 years, Raymond Hale looked incredibly small. His usual confident posture had collapsed, leaving his shoulders slumped beneath a wrinkled golf shirt. He did not wait for an invitation, stepping past me into the foyer and stopping abruptly when he saw Vivian and the attorney sitting in the living room. "The bank froze the loan," my father said, addressing me directly while entirely ignoring the other women. "They called Kendra an hour ago." "Because the paperwork was forged," I replied, keeping my distance. He rubbed a weathered hand over his face. "I put my entire retirement fund into your sister's company. Every single cent, Meredith. If this loan does not close, the business folds, and your mother and I will lose our house." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from my arm. "You need to call the title company and tell them there was a misunderstanding. Sign a real release and waive your right of first refusal so the loan can proceed." The sheer magnitude of the request forced me to take a step back. He wanted me to surrender my legal rights to save a fraudulent transaction that the true owner had never approved. "Did you know about the outside investors?" I asked. My father blinked, his eyes darting toward Helen for a fraction of a second. "What investors? This is a private family business." I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket, opened the photo gallery, and turned the screen toward him. It displayed the clear image I had taken of my mother's tablet screen. The email thread laid out the Friday transfer plan, explicitly demanding that nobody mention the investors at the dinner table. Raymond stared at the glowing device. His jaw tightened, and the facade of the confused, desperate parent vanished instantly. The calculating man who had spoken on the audio recording returned to the surface. "Kendra was going to pay everyone back," he muttered, his tone shifting into defensive anger. "She just needed a little more time. If you give her the time, the investors get their money, and nobody gets hurt." "That is not true," Helen spoke up from the sofa. Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. The widow opened her leather binder, pulled out a printed text message conversation, and held it out. I took the paper and read the exchange between Helen and my mother. 2 days after Helen had wired her life insurance money to Noah Legacy Holdings, Linda had received a massive thank you fee deposited directly into her personal checking account. My mother had not just recruited her friends out of blind loyalty to her golden child. She had collected a commission on the fraud. Both of my parents possessed a direct financial stake in the deception. They were never victims of my sister's ambition. They were active participants, perfectly willing to use my career and my home to subsidize their choices. "You need to leave," I told my father. The coldness in my chest finally spread to my voice, leaving it completely hollow. Raymond looked at the printed text message, then at the hard expression on Vivian's face. He turned and walked out the door, without arguing. The heavy wood clicked shut behind him, sealing the heavy silence inside the house. That evening, several hours after my father left, my phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. The caller identification showed my mother's name. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Linda did not ask how I was doing, and she certainly did not apologize for the referral fees. Her voice crackled with a terrifying, brittle energy. "Kendra is going live tonight," my mother announced. "She is going to tell everyone on the internet exactly what you did to this family." My mother's threat hung in the air, vibrating with a desperate, frantic energy. I stood in the foyer, the cool stone floor pressing against the soles of my feet. A sudden notification pinged on my phone, then another, and another. Social media alerts began to cascade down my lock screen like rain. I handed my phone to Mara. The attorney glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing deeply. Kendra had already started the broadcast. The image on the screen showed my sister sitting alone in her walk-in closet, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a framed photograph of herself and Noah against her chest. The lighting was perfect, designed to make her look like the grieving, abandoned mother she pretended to be. "She is telling her followers that you promised the villa to Noah as a gift," Mara murmured, scanning the scrolling comments that popped up underneath the video. "She claims you are currently trying to evict them to spite her." The chat is moving so fast I can barely read it. Thousands of people are already watching. I watched the screen as Kendra sobbed into her hands, whispering that her own sister was choosing greed over family. Linda popped into the frame behind her, nodding grimly as she confirmed every word with a mournful expression. Raymond stood just off camera, his voice occasionally adding a somber tone of agreement. My phone began to vibrate constantly. Messages flooded in from acquaintances, former colleagues, and even a few corporate contacts at my wealth management firm. Some people expressed shock, while others leveled outright accusations, asking if I truly intended to throw a 16-year-old boy out on the street. "We need to respond," I said, my voice tight. "I have the deed here, and I have the recorded memorandum. We can post the truth right now. We can show them that I never owned the property." Vivian walked over, placing a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. She leaned in, her eyes sharp and focused. "If you post your private documents on social media while a fraud investigation is active, you are just feeding the fire. You will give them ammunition to claim you are stalking them or trying to intimidate them into silence. Do not give them a public platform to lie about the records." "Then what do I do?" I asked, looking at the screen where my sister was currently wiping a single perfect tear from her cheek. "I have to stop this." "You stop it by letting them dig their own grave," Mara replied, tapping the screen to pause the video. "Every word they say on this broadcast is recorded. Every false accusation is a piece of evidence. If you answer them publicly, you force them to adjust their story. If you stay quiet and let them commit to these lies, they cannot back out when the fraud investigators arrive." I watched as Helen stood up from the sofa. The widow reached into her leather binder, pulling out a handful of legal complaints she had prepared over the last hour. She looked at me, her eyes hardened by the realization of her own loss. "They used my husband's life insurance money," Helen said, her voice low and steady. "I have my wire transfer receipts. I have the signed investment contracts. I am going to the local police station to file a formal complaint for financial exploitation, and then I am going to the state attorney general's office. I will show them exactly what Linda and Kendra promised me." Another investor called Mara's office, and then another. They were not interested in watching my sister cry on the internet. They wanted their money back. The narrative was shifting from a petty family drama into a multi-party fraud investigation. I felt a cold sense of clarity. The internet was a fickle, noisy beast, but the legal system cared very little for how many followers Kendra managed to garner. "Let her broadcast," I whispered. My mother arrived at the villa just after sunset, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She did not bother to greet us, walking straight into the living room as if she still owned the place. She pulled a folded document from her designer handbag and tossed it onto the glass table. "Sign this," Linda commanded, her voice devoid of any pretense of warmth. "It is a simple statement acknowledging that the family was always welcome to use the property for business and that you have been holding back funds that were meant to cover the mortgage. If you sign this, I will force Kendra to admit the transfer was just a misunderstanding on social media. I will make her tell everyone you are the good sister. The proposal was breathtaking in its audacity. She wanted me to sign a confession of debt and a waiver of my own rights, all to purchase her silence and a temporary reprieve from my sister's digital mob. I looked at the paper, then at my mother. The woman who had raised me was standing in my living room, cold and calculating, trying to sell me my own reputation. "You are asking me to sign another lie," I said, my voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. Linda took a step forward, her eyes narrowing into icy slits. "I am asking you to choose whether your father loses his home. He is upstairs right now, Meredith. He is watching the comments on Kendra's video. He is terrified. You can save him with one signature, or you can watch this family burn to the ground. It is your choice." I watched her for a long moment, seeing the exhaustion and the desperation behind her aggressive posture. She did not care about the truth. She only cared about the survival of her own comfortable, curated reality. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt at it all. I stared at the statement Linda had dropped on the table, feeling the weight of the paper as if it could crush the life out of the room. My mother waited, her eyes darting between my face and the clock on the wall, banking on the ingrained habit of obedience she had spent 30 years carving into my psyche. I had spent half a lifetime playing the role of the reliable daughter, the one who fixed the broken things, the one who smoothed the jagged edges of my family's chaotic choices. That version of Meredith Hale stopped existing the moment I saw the fraudulent grant deed. "I am not signing this," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even myself. Linda recoiled as if I had struck her. "You are condemning your father to the street. He is 66 years old, Meredith. Where is he supposed to go? If you just sign, the lender will release the funds, and we can move past all of this." "I did not put him on the street," I replied, watching the flickering screen of my phone where Kendra was still crying for an audience. "His own choices did that. If you want him to have a home, you and Kendra need to tell the truth to the investors you swindled." My mother turned on her heel and stormed out of the villa, the slam of the heavy oak door echoing through the marble foyer. She did not look back. I remained standing in the living room, listening to the silence, until my phone chirped with a new message from Aaron. My brother-in-law, Kendra's ex-husband, had sent a short, urgent text asking me to call him. When I answered, Aaron sounded breathless. He was currently watching Noah, who was sitting in his living room, white as a sheet. "Meredith, you need to hear this," Aaron said, his tone strained. "Noah just told me something." He was terrified of getting in trouble, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. I paced toward the window, looking out at the manicured garden that had been my only refuge for so many years. "What is it?" "The vlog," Aaron continued. "Noah remembers the night of the birthday dinner. Kendra had insisted he set up his camera on a tripod in the living room. She told him it was for a vlog capturing the legacy moment when you presented the house. She made him start recording before you even arrived, then sent him upstairs to wait until she called for the reveal." My breath hitched. The phone on the tripod. "The camera was still running, Meredith," Aaron said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Everything was uploaded to the cloud backup automatically when the battery died later that night. Noah just showed it to me. Every word they said before you walked into the room." I stood frozen as Aaron described the footage. Kendra, Raymond, and Linda had stood right in front of the camera, meticulously choreographing the ambush. They had debated how to handle me if I hesitated. My father had discussed how to keep the investors in the dark until the title was officially transferred. They had explicitly planned to trap Noah in the frame the second I signed, ensuring the boy would be the face of their stolen asset. "It is all there," Aaron said. "The conspiracy, the intent, the plan to use your own family against you. Noah doesn't want to be a pawn anymore. He wants to know what he should do with the file." I looked over at Vivian, who was watching me from across the room. I felt a sudden, powerful surge of relief. The evidence was not just legal documents. It was the raw, unfiltered truth caught on tape by the very child they claimed to be protecting. "Tell Noah he is not a pawn," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And tell him he is doing the right thing." By Friday afternoon, Aaron and Noah had securely delivered the original cloud file and its account records to Mara. Only then did the walls begin closing in on my sister's manufactured reality. The title company had already flagged the forged deed, the lender had retracted the loan, and the automated investor campaign had already served as the final nail in the coffin. Kendra called my line for the last time that night. She was not screaming, and she was not begging. She sounded small, hollowed out by the sudden, brutal weight of her own actions. "They froze everything," she whispered, her words barely audible over the crackling connection. "The business accounts, the personal savings, the lines of credit. Everything is locked. If you do not fix this, those investors will lose every dollar they put in." I looked at the house around me, the beautiful villa that had been the stage for a lifetime of manipulation. "Kendra," I said, my voice quiet but final, "you are still asking me to save you from the consequences of your own greed. I am done paying for the damage you keep choosing." I ended the call, set my phone face down on the table, and walked toward the door. I had no interest in hearing her tell me I was the one who destroyed the family. I was merely the one who stopped lying about it. The following months felt like watching a slow, inevitable demolition of a structure built on sand. Kendra finally sat down with investigators, her initial attempts to shift blame onto the real estate broker dissolving into nothing when Mara produced the full email chain. My sister had insisted the broker treat the document preparation as a simple workaround, but his written replies clearly stated he could not proceed without Vivian's actual signature and my verified release. Kendra had ignored those warnings, repeatedly promising she would handle the signatures herself. The financial wreckage left behind told the rest of the story. A forensic accountant condensed months of activity into a single devastating summary. The investments gathered from Helen and her peers never entered any legitimate management fund. Instead, the money traveled directly through Kendra's personal accounts, funding high-end rental vehicles, private school tuition, and credit card balances that had ballooned after the collapse of her previous lifestyle. Even the mortgage payments for my parents' home had been funneled through the same tangled web, effectively linking them to the very fraud they claimed they never understood. I sat across from Kendra in a secure office during one of the final pre-trial meetings. She looked entirely diminished, stripped of the designer wardrobe and the practiced, effortless confidence she once used to command every room. She accepted a plea agreement that guaranteed a lengthy prison sentence, complete with a court-ordered restitution plan and a permanent ban from ever soliciting outside investment again. Even then, as the lawyers finalized the paperwork, she kept her eyes fixed on me with a look of lingering disbelief, as if she still expected me to intervene and fix the life she had systematically dismantled. My phone rang while I was packing the last of my things in the villa. It was my father. He sounded small, his voice shaking with a tremor I had never heard in the decades he spent pretending to be the steady patriarch of our family. "The bank is moving forward with the foreclosure," he said, skipping any attempt at a greeting. "They refused the extension, and the interest on the other debts has become unmanageable. They are taking the house, Meredith." I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the silence of a home I had cared for more than anyone else in this world. "I know," I answered, my tone remaining quiet. "I need you to help us," he pleaded, the old habit of issuing commands now replaced by a desperate, wheezing urgency. "If you take out a loan against your salary, or if you ask Vivian to buy the property and let us stay, we could keep the place. We have nowhere else to go. You are the only one who can save us." I closed my eyes, letting the truth wash over me. For years, I had been the family safety net, catching every single person who jumped because they trusted I would always be there to break their fall. "I was the only one who always helped you," I said, my voice steady and devoid of anger. "That is not the same as being the only one who can." "You are going to let them take everything?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "After everything I did for you?" "I did not destroy this family, Dad," I replied, the words finally feeling like the truth I had needed to say for a lifetime. "I simply stopped paying for the damage you kept choosing." I ended the call and placed the phone on the mantelpiece. The screen went dark, and the villa finally felt like just a building. Vivian walked into the room a few minutes later, holding 2 sets of keys. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, and placed both sets on the glass table. "You have 2 paths forward, Meredith," she said, her voice gentle. "The first is an equity stake in this villa, purchased at an incredibly favorable rate. You could own a piece of this estate and stay as long as you wish." She tapped the second set of keys. The second is a small house on the outskirts of the city. It is modest, entirely your own, and requires no management or caretaking on your part. It is not an investment opportunity. It is simply a place to live where no one will ever ask you to sign your name to something you do not believe in. She paused, looking at me with the quiet pride of someone who had watched me survive the hardest year of my life. What do you want when no one is demanding anything from you? I looked at the house that had been the stage for every lie Kendra ever told. Then, I looked at the keys to the smaller home, a place where I would finally be just Meredith, not the resource, not the safety net, and not the sister who had to fix everything. I don't want the villa, I whispered. I reached out, my fingers closing around the keys to the smaller house. They felt solid, heavy, and completely mine. For the first time in my life, the future did not look like a burden I had to carry for someone else. It just looked like a blank page. 1 year had passed since the villa had been cleared of the debris left behind by my family's greed. I stood in the doorway of a modest ranch-style house, the early October air crisp and smelling of dry leaves and pine. The structure felt entirely different from the grand Spanish Revival estate where I had spent so much of my life acting as a shield for people who never bothered to know me. Here, the floorboards did not groan with the weight of hidden expectations, and the walls were not painted with the veneer of manufactured perfection. The criminal case had long since been finalized through a series of plea agreements and civil restitution orders. Kendra sat in a correctional facility far from the city, having traded her social media following for a uniform and a regimented life. She had been forced to sell every piece of luxury clothing, every leased vehicle, and every asset she claimed to own to begin the long, slow process of compensating the investors she had betrayed. The brand she had carefully curated around the image of a self-made mother had evaporated, leaving behind only the cold reality of a permanent fraud record. My parents occupied a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the city, a harsh shift from the sprawling suburban house that had been the epicenter of my childhood. Raymond had lost his standing as the family patriarch the day the bank foreclosed, and Linda's once vibrant social circle had vanished after her involvement in the referral fee scheme became public knowledge. My mother still occasionally sent me letters filled with vague, defensive excuses about how everyone made mistakes, but I never opened them. I could not afford to invite that kind of dishonesty back into my peace. Noah was doing better, though the road ahead remained long. He lived mostly with his father, Aaron, who had worked tirelessly to untangle the boy from the web of content creation his mother had spun around his existence. Noah attended therapy regularly, finally allowed to just be a teenager instead of a prop in a digital performance. We stayed in touch, and I made sure he understood that his worth was not measured by the legacy his mother had tried to steal. Vivian visited my new home on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She looked as sharp and formidable as ever, though the lines around her eyes suggested she had carried the weight of the investigation just as heavily as I had. She walked through my small living room, observing the simple furniture and the lack of pretense, and she looked genuinely satisfied. I had refused to take a single cent of equity in her estate, choosing to build a life completely divorced from her professional mentorship or her financial benevolence. I needed to know that my daily reality was entirely my own. "It is quite a change from the villa," Vivian noted, turning to look at me. "Does it feel too small after living in such a grand space?" I looked down at the key in my palm, a simple, unadorned piece of brass that belonged to a home I had purchased with the salary I had fought to keep. I thought of the silver key Vivian had once entrusted to me, the symbol of a trust that had been built on service and survival. Then, I looked at the plain wooden door frame of my own entryway, a threshold no one could ever force me to cross again. "No," I replied, feeling a profound sense of clarity settle over my heart. "It feels like mine." The words tasted like the first clean breath of air after surfacing from deep water. I stepped into the foyer and closed the door behind me, engaging the lock with a solid, satisfying click. I was no longer the manager of someone else's life, nor the silent victim of a family who saw me as an endless supply of favors. I was simply Meredith. And for the first time in 39 years, I had nothing to fix, nothing to hide, and absolutely no one to save but myself. I stood in the quiet hallway of a home that was finally, truly mine. You have spent a lifetime being the safety net for people who never bothered to ask if you were tired of catching them. You have learned the hardest way possible that there is a profound, world-altering difference between being a helpful member of a family and being the only one holding it together. If you are currently sitting in the middle of a mess you did not create, waiting for a thank you that will never come, please understand this. You are not being tenured by stepping away. You are not failing your family by refusing to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You have been told that love is measured by what you are willing to sacrifice, but the truth is that real love never requires you to erase your own future to fund someone else's mistakes. The moment you stop paying for the damage they keep choosing to cause, you are not destroying them. You are simply allowing them to finally confront the reality of their own actions. Keeping the secret, covering the debt, and swallowing your own boundaries does not save anyone. It only guarantees that the cycle continues exactly as it is until you have nothing left to give. You deserve a life that is built on your own foundations, not on the crumbling remnants of someone else's greed. You deserve to walk through a door that you chose for yourself, where you owe no one an explanation, a favor, or a miracle. You are not obligated to be the person who fixes everything, and you certainly do not have to be the martyr in a story that was never really yours to begin with. Look at the people in your life today and ask yourself if they value you as a person or as a resource. If you woke up tomorrow and stopped being the one who solves every crisis, would they still show up for you, or would they just move on to the next person they could use? If you have been living your life as the silent foundation of a house that is currently being sold out from under you, it is time to stop holding up the roof. It is time to start building your own home, stone by stone, until the ground beneath your feet finally feels solid and entirely, undeniably yours.